Welcome to week 2 of Help Understanding and Reaching Teens and 20-somethings. We're so glad you're here. We are going to have a lot of fun today. So picture from the past of my kids being goofy and whatever else. I'm sure you have a lot of those pictures in your own home. But let me review some things from last week just to catch everybody up to speed in really fast form and fashion, okay? So you caught from last week that this word adolescence, I don't know if you've heard that word before, it was new to you last week, or it was a review for you, but adolescence does not equal teenager. It doesn't even equal juvenile. It's a different thing altogether. Adolescence is this new word through psychosocial development that came about 50 years ago because they had to have a term to describe this new phenomena that's happening between child and adult. And so I gave you all the definitions around that. Identity, autonomy, and belonging is the task that every single adolescent's trying to go through from 11 to mid-20s. I know that might have been a shocker, but you kind of probably experienced that and knew something was up. Something's going on in the next generation, but now you know. Now you know, about 11 to mid-20s is how long it's taken to start in biology, ends in culture, and work this thing through. And so today we're going to turn a corner. I'm going to give you some of what's happened as a result of all this that you may see, you may not see, or might go to a little deeper level for you to understand what's actually going on. So that's where we are. I introduced this word, egocentric abstraction, which is that whole idea of I know I'm impacting you, but I don't really care. And that's what's going on in adolescence life. And that's what you probably feel at home, is that whole autonomy piece where it's the power struggle, it's the independence. They want their full independence, but they're not quite ready yet. We've experienced that even the last 24 hours in our own home, that whole that wrestle of, man, I want it, but I'm not quite ready for it, but we want you to have it, but we want to coach you along in that, and that's the tension that happens all the time. But it's this idea that for self-protection, and I'm going to get into some friendship issues and some things going on in their lives, that it feels more like a gang family unit than it does with their friendships than it does what it used to be back when many of us in the room were in high school and had friendships around that. So it's interesting that we have this little struggle going on where for self-protection, they're going to do things to try and just get through this. They just want to get through adolescence, become an adult. They feel it, but they also intuitively know they're not quite ready for it. And so there's the tension that's happening. So let me give you, as a result of all that, a number of categories. You have them on your outline with you, but let me give you a number of categories that are going on. As a result of that, adolescents live in what I'd call, and what my mentor named Chap Clark, who's been in the youth ministry forever out of Fuller Theological Seminary and the Youth Institute out of Fuller, does a lot of research around this stuff, and he would coin this the underground world. So they live in this underground world. What is that all about? Well, let me give you some history of this whole thing because it didn't always look like this. So 1950s, a lot of things were going on, obviously. Music, movies, and dress almost all looked the same for all generations. It was really interesting and fascinating. The same movies everybody would watch, the same music everybody would listen to when it was being introduced. Everything looked the same in culture. There was no youth culture. There was all culture pretty much the same. So the way dad dressed is pretty much the way they dressed the 6-year-old son, and it worked its way through. And that's the way it played. So the landscape was, there really wasn't a lot of youth or younger or teenagers doing something much different than the rest of society. But times changed. You get to 1960s, a ditch begins to be dug because of a lot of events that took place. Obviously, youth culture, Vietnam War, British invasions, music, and JFK's assassinated, and a lot of life events took place that shaped the world, and that's why in the 1960s you have the whole youth movement going on and took to the streets, and flower children, all the stuff started to happen as a result of some of the things going on around the world in reaction to it. But what happened is this ditch began to be dug where they have their own separate identity starting to take place. It's coupled with adolescent development and how that's playing along. But now, so now they start to dress a little bit differently and act a little bit differently and do things on the weekends differently than their parents do. And it looked a little bit different as we're working through. And then over time, the hole started to be dug in the 70s and the 80s where there is an absolute shift separation between youth and their parents. I grew up in 70s and 80s. Many of you did. We talked about that last week to mark that for you, how old I am. But times were a little bit different. There's more distinction between the next generation and parents and grandparents. And music looked different. MTV came into play. All these things. Anybody remember what that is? Oh, how times have changed. Now there aren't 5 channels from way back on the television set. And a remote control, by the way, was having your child get up and walk across the room to change the channel or the volume level. Anybody remember that? Some of you just marked yourself, your age. But now today you have 500 plus channels you can look at on your device in your hands. Oh, how times have changed. And so what's happened is now a bridge has been built over the top of this ditch. So the next generation lives in this underground world, mainly fueled by the digital age, social media, smartphones that are in their hands. And I'm quite certain that you feel tension of that even in your own home if your children have a smartphone. How do you set boundaries and how do you figure that out and how much time? And if you want to really drive yourself crazy, you go read research on that stuff and you go, oh my goodness, why am I letting them even have one? I know all that is a tense thing and what they see and how they can have access to anybody in the world at their fingertips. It's crazy. And so they've built this bridge over the top where times have changed, where now they live in their own world for self-protection with the people. They're going to surround themselves with the people they're going to have their backs the most. They're going to take care of them the most. That's the world that they live in, whether we want them to or not. So that's what we need to focus on and work through as we think this thing forward. By the way, in general, even though we still know girls develop a little bit faster than boys do, we know that, and you intuitively see that. But in general, most of the whole adolescent development journey is pretty similar for boys and girls. But we just know intuitively, I don't know if you knew this, but 6th, 7th, 8th grade girls are the most relationally intuitive people on the planet. I mean, think about it. They are going to school and going to their social places, and the question on their minds is, do you like me? Do you like me? Do you like me? Do you like me? They're like a centipede with all the, 6th grade boys, on the other hand, are Shrek. 2. I don't know. Mom shows up to pick them up at middle school, and he comes out, and he can't really recognize which one's his car, but he makes his way finally because Mom gets out of the car. Hey, Johnny, over here. Johnny, he makes his way in, sits down in the front seat. She looks down. He's missing a shoe. Johnny, where's your shoe? I don't know. Where's your backpack, Johnny? I mean, so he gets up, he runs back in the school to get his backpack. Girls are way different, right? Girls, way different experience. They seem to have more together earlier than boys. But in general, with adolescent development, it's pretty much the same across the board. So that's one thing that's going on here, is they're starting to live in this underground world. You guys, this is going to be discouraging, but the best we can do is to try and sit on the top of the stairs of their underground world to connect with them when they're available. That's the key. And by the way, I was telling my wife this morning, all the things I'm talking about, I'm still working on. I'm still trying to figure this out. But their perception is reality. You can write that down. Their perception is reality. So whatever they perceive to be true is true during adolescent development, whether it's true or not. And so they feel their way through a lot of different things, and their perception's reality. So we have to be available when they want to talk. And oftentimes, when does that happen? Late at night. Yep. And I like to go to bed at 9, just full disclosure, because I like to get up a little bit earlier and get her going, get going. And so, during different seasons of your family life, you have to adjust all those things. But oftentimes when they're hitting, this adolescent thing, they want to talk at 11 o'clock at night, and you're like, oh my gosh, I have a meeting at 6. But you better be available, or if you say no enough times, they're going to tune out and not be around to talk, and you're going to go, what happened? Well, you were setting this pattern of never being available for them. So that's the first thing, this underground world. The second thing is adolescents live out multiple selves. This is where we can lean into psychology a little bit to help us. Because here's what's going on, is they don't know who they are, because now that you know the whole story from last week with identity, trying to figure out who they are, they don't know who they are, so they try on different things. And I don't know how old your children are, or if you're a teacher or your coach, you watch this happen, like they'll show up different the next day, dressed a different way, acting a different way. Like, what is going on? It's like schizophrenia. What's happening? Because this is what they're doing. They're trying on different things. And so this would be maybe a typical 18-year-old, for instance. They might be an athlete, student, friend, country music listener, Christian music listener, cross-country runner, EMS student, lifeguard, neighborhood youth, church person, youth ministry attender, son, brother, grandson, social media self, with teachers, coaches, others. These are all the parts of the world that, you add to the list your child. And you're going to discover they're trying out different things. But for an adult, because we have life experience, you guys, we have more time. We have more interactions with people. We have other experiences. Our frontal lobes are fully developed. Now we can look back at ourselves and perceive who we are. And we've settled in, at least most of us, maybe not me, we've fully settled into who we are as an adult. But for the adolescent, they're trying to figure this out. And so from our perception, it's like, who are you? But that's the worst question you could ever ask them. Because they're going, I don't know. But then they're going to probably argue about it because they think they know who they are. But they don't, because they haven't fully come out of this thing yet. Make sense? So they're wrestling. There's this thing going on. To help us along, here's a good quote to help understand this. Adolescents develop a proliferation of selves that vary as a function of social context. These include self with the father, the mother, close friend, romantic partner, peers, as well as the self in the role of student, on the job, athlete. A critical development task of adolescence, therefore, is the construction of multiple selves in different roles and relationships. They are trying it out. It's an experiment for them to figure out who they are, where they're going to land. That wasn't true for those of us who were growing up in the 70s and the 80s. We got there faster. We got it figured out faster. So by the time we turned 18, it made sense. We could be a full-fledged adult on our own. Not so much anymore. And that's why, boy, a lot probably go to college, and the major they set out to do and they graduate with, they don't even use today. And I could tell you story after story after story of nieces and nephews and other friends and their kids who aren't even doing the degree that they set out to do. So the college experience is much more about helping them grow up as an adult than it is the specific education they get. Because remember, they can reinvent themselves and customize it any way they want to in our world today. The world is their oyster. They can travel. They can take a year off. They can customize their education how they want. But for those of us who are parents a little older, we don't like that very much. There's tension there because that's not the way it was done when we came through that whole system. Another area is the successful kids learn to adapt. This is going to be a tough one because now that you know what adolescent development is, now you know about identity, autonomy, and belonging, now you're going to understand what they're going through. And so what sometimes happens is adults that don't understand the adolescent development journey get tricked into thinking that the smartest, brightest kids coming through, oh man, they're just maturing faster and going to come out of this faster. Not necessarily. Why? Because literally their frontal lobe is not developed until their mid-20s. That does not speed up just because they look more responsible, or let me dare say, they're playing the game because they figured out the system. They figured out how to, well, in the olden days, we would have called it brown nosing. But in these days, I'm adapting to figure out what the expectations of performance and competition are for me so I can adapt to it faster and get through this thing. That's the goal. For self-protection, I want to get through this. So some, yes, it's true. Sometimes their brain is a little bit further along than the average adolescent, but for the most part, don't be tricked all the time into thinking, even with your own child or the children around you, like, man, they're so much further ahead. How come my child isn't there? Well, maybe because they figured out some skills to adapt and change with those adults, those teachers, those coaches, to figure out how to be on their good side. Because, teachers do have favorites. Parents might too, but I don't want to talk about that. In their own homes. But it's this idea that there are some students who can adapt and change. Let me give you this quote. Successful students learn to devise various strategies to stay ahead of their peers and to the to please those in power positions. Successful students, for a variety of reasons, were not as adept as playing the survival game. So there's a lot of research to back that. They figured out that there are some students who have figured out how to get by. Now you might go back in time and go, oh man, that's always been. When I had friends who did that too, and it was like, i.e. they cheated on a test or whatever to get by faster than their peers, or yeah, that's true, but it is like an overdrive these days. So even though they're a valedictorian in their class, may not necessarily mean they're ready for the full-fledged world because they haven't come through adolescence yet. You tracking with me? So don't be tricked into that, just be discerning about that. Another area that's changed as a result of all this is friendships have changed. This is kind of a fun one, actually. It's gone from cliques to clusters. Like when I was growing up, the band kids were together, the basketball players, the football players, the computer nerds, when that was just starting to be a thing. There are all these segmented different groups in the high school where you did that. Raise your hand if you would say that you were one of the popular kids in your school growing up. And don't be ashamed. Just go, do that. And it was probably based on like cheerleader, football player, basketball player, athlete, that kind of thing. That's how it was defined back then. Not so much anymore. It's gone from cliques of people around the similar activities, clubs, sports, and now it's gone over to clusters. So, 1930s to 70s, that was the deal. For middle school and high school, it was associated around your activities. So your friends were going to be the basketball players, your friends are going to be, that kind of makes sense. But today, in the middle of high school, it's changed. And so cliques, 1930s to 70s, today clusters are formed around self-protection because of this whole adolescent journey, underground world, like more gang-like, as I said, where you got my back, I got your back, like for good or for bad. Like, I just want to get through this thing. I want to individuate, become an individual. I want to be responsible, be on my own. So I'm going to put the people around me, my peers, my friends, who are going to protect me through this journey. So the way I talk about it, it's Grease versus Hunger Games. You mean the movie Grease was associated around the pink ladies were together, the leather jacket dudes were together. Now the dilemma of the whole movie is John Travolta's trying to figure out who he is. And Sandy's like, well, they were different on the beach in the summer than they were, there's a song about that, than they were in the middle of the movie. And so the tension was like, I'm not fully in that group, and she's the new girl, but he's part of that group, but then he's trying to run track and play basketball, which you can't. I mean, it was a really fascinating movie to think about it from a friendship perspective. But then you have Hunger Games. What's the point of Hunger Games? Like, we're not all friends. We just want to self-protect to get through this game. Let's get through this game together. And let's make some alliances and allegiances so we can get through this game of life, so we can get out the other side alive. And that is much more closer to what's going on with peers and friendships than ever before. Because, by the way, go test this at home. If you ask, and you probably already know who your child's friends are. And my guess is, if you're like my kids, it's like, well, they have somebody who listens to that kind of music, and someone who's on the basketball team, and someone who's over there and loves computer stuff, and over there, this person over there is in the band, and this youth group. But then I got my school friends, and it's diverse, isn't it? It's much more variety around that. So what's the common denominator? It's like, let me drill in a little bit. I think the common denominator is authenticity and self-protection. So listen, here's how it plays out, and I've watched it in my own home, and I've watched it with students around youth ministries I've been a part of, is they go, oh man, we had such a great conversation at Starbucks together. Awesome, what'd you talk about? Oh man, we bared our souls together. I'm using my language, they wouldn't say that, but we were really open and honest and transparent and authentic, and I shared all my struggles with them, and they shared all their struggles with me, and it was awesome. We left and we hugged, and it was great. So, well, then what? Like if you struggle with something, or you want to, if you're a Christ follower and you're trying to get rid of that sin and get closer to Jesus, what did you do then? Well, not much else. If super spiritual kids that know how to play the games will say, oh, I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you. Do they really pray? I don't know. But so this is how it plays out, is authenticity and transparency without any next steps of accountability. And that's how I see it played out. Like the exceptions to the rule are, yeah, we're really in our lives and we're holding each other accountable and helping each other. But that's more adult-like. But with students, it's more like, oh man, we're really close because we opened up to each other, but there wasn't any next steps but how do we go further down the road together to be closer to Jesus and to grow in a relationship and to not fall back into that mistake that we fell back into? I don't hear a lot of that from students. I remind you from last week, I've spent the last almost a year with junior focus groups and senior focus groups, and we drilled down at Mission Hills. They were open and honest because they're all about transparency and openness. And the things that they told me in that setting, not because they knew me very well, I was shocked at actually, because there's no way I would have said that to an adult back then. But they're way open about everything, even their struggles and the tension and the anxiety that they feel in that whole situation. But around friendships, they weren't really talking about like, my friend is really holding me accountable to going further with Jesus. It was more about, man, we just know each other really, really well and open up to each other. And that's a good first step. But what do you do with that? How do you go to the next step of pushing each other and holding each other accountable to some stuff? Another area as a result of all these things is there's more freedoms, dangers, anxiety. And you may say, well, there's always been those things. That's true. There have always been those things, but it's on steroids now. So there's all sorts of things going on, you guys, from, this anxiety level is causing cutting off the charts. Just talk to any therapist or counselor, how many teenagers they see that are doing this stuff. I was at a camp a number of years ago and sitting, I was speaking at the camp, and I like to make my way around and sit with different students and get to know them, because I think that to build relationships before you speak, really important and that kind of thing. So I did that, and I'm sitting at a table with a girl that is pierced up all over her face. I mean, lots of piercings. And started a conversation with her, and she was open to share. And I said, did it hurt to get all those piercings on your face? Oh yeah, I did it myself. I was like, whoa, ouch. Why'd you do it? And she opened up and said, to escape some stuff. Because the pain on my face helped me escape the pain in my heart, is the way I would say it. But that's what she was saying. So there's all sorts of ways that the next generation is trying to alleviate this pressure that adults are putting on them to perform and compete. So back to adolescent development, back to, do you love me for just me, or do you love me based on what I do, how I perform, what my grades are, and how many goals I scored? How's that being measured? And so, everything that's always been happening on the weekends with teenagers is still happening on the weekends with teenagers. It's just gone to another level, stratosphere, where like almost morality is missing, even among Christian kids. And that's really, really scary. It's like, where's the moral compass? Where is the authority of the Bible? Where are those kinds of things, which I know you care about because you're in the room right here at Mission Hills Church, but we need to figure this out so we can go further with this whole thing. 70% of millennials would say that they are experiencing some level of burnout, well over half. 54% are chronically lonely. 30% of millennials and Gen Z state they experience disruptive anxiety and depression. All you have to do is watch the news around college campuses to see the results of what's coming. So we get frustrated about that, for some of us probably, about what's going on, and you got to have your own space because you're mad about a certain speaker coming on campus, so we're going to take care of you and coddle you through this thing, and then helicopter parenting and snowplow parenting and all this stuff enters in this whole deal, and we get frustrated maybe about that, but then you got to stop and look in the mirror, you guys, me included, and go, how am I contributing to this happening with the next generation too, starting with my own kids? How am I controlling things too much and not letting them fail forward sometimes to be able to, they're just going to have to learn some stuff, and it's going to be through some failures. But as a parent, you don't want them to have to go through that, but you and I, we all did. We all did. The only problem now is because adolescence is taking longer, it might be more times before they fully come out of this whole thing. Young people who are stressed are, in a word, egocentric. Though not necessarily conceited and prideful, they have little opportunity to consider the needs and interests of others. So we as followers of Jesus immediately default to sin nature. Like, they're just sinful. This is why they're doing what they're doing. And last week I talked about that. I kind of hit and miss on it. Like, that's true. We all have the sin nature. But on the other hand, there's a developmental piece that's going on. It doesn't necessarily mean they're being prideful or conceited. It might mean they're going through something. They're trying to figure out who they are. They're trying on different selves. Their clothing changes, how they act, the way they interact with a friend, the friends that they shift to hang out with next weekend. And you're going, what is going on? Well, adolescent development's going on. That's what's going on. So how do we respond to all this, you guys? Let me charge ahead here to give you a model. If this is a tightrope like we talked about last week, at the top of the tightrope, this is what adolescents are going through. And on this side of it is the maternal attachment, as I talked about. Obviously, from birth through about 11, the mom's role in this whole thing is vitally important. It's the maternal attachment. It just is. Then you get into a paternal attachment. Now, here's what's going to throw you off, because it's not naturally the way we think. Dad's role during adolescence is huge. It's huge. And, God's ideal plan is one man, one woman for life in marriage, raising children, and so both are involved. But the deal is, and trust me, I've been tempted, and there have been moments where I have. I want to check out as a dad and go, I want my wife to handle that, because I don't even know what to say, what to do. I'm stuck. And I know this stuff mentally in my head, but it's hard to walk out sometimes, isn't it? But when you're in the middle of it, you're like, I know my role is really, really important, especially around love and grace, not as much about truth, although truth's still there. But you have to realize that dad's role in this whole thing is super important. There's a little bit of research that's done. You didn't know I was going to talk about this. But there's a little bit of research that's been done that says that the closer a dad is to their daughter in particular at the beginning of this, moving from here to here, the closer it delays the start of her puberty. Why? Because of comfort and love and security. And so it delays her beginning this whole journey in a healthy way because of the closeness that dad, in a healthy biblical way, has towards a daughter. There's some research around that thing, which is really fascinating, really. But think about it. It makes sense, because a super stress, and I will go to extremes, but the research backs it, of a girl growing up in urban environments where it's off the charts. When do you think her puberty starts? As early as it possibly can, like 11. And in African American communities, it can bounce down to 9 or 10. Isn't that nuts? Like, a girl starts her puberty at 9 or 10? That's nuts. But the research backs this kind of thing. So all that to say, dad's really important. And then our goal is to have a Heavenly Father church community attachment, interdependence, not independence. They want independence, but our goal is to have them be interdependent on God their Father through His Son Jesus, and connected to the whole church. And that's, by the way, our goal around Mission Hills. We're working on that, and that's partly my role, is to how do we transition all the way through this thing so that what happens on the other end. And then family stability is this foundation. So obviously, I didn't talk much about it, but the more unstable a family unit is, the harder this thing is. That just makes sense, but it's hard to hear. But the healthy as we possibly can be, even though we're all messed up in one way or another, we're all dysfunctional, just trying to get through this thing. But the more stable the family unit is, the easier this journey is for an adolescent to get through the other side. Does that make sense? So there's some biblical verses that are really interesting that Paul uses with the church in Thessalonica. And he says to them, I was gentle among you like a mother. Paul said that. Like, I was gentle among you like a mother. How so? Because a mother is gentle traditionally. A mother is more gentle than a father normally. It was true in Hebrew biblical culture, and it's still true today. In general, normally, it is true in my house, the mother is more gentle than the father. Father, truth, a little bit more. Mom, a little more grace. I mean, there's a thing that works out there. I think it's a God-given design in partnership in this whole thing. But it's interesting that Paul pulls that metaphor out to go, when I was there with you and planted this church, I was gentle like a mother among you. But then he turns the corner and he says, but I was also like a father among you, because I encouraged, I comforted, and I urged you to live right, which sounds like truth. So there's a natural default that dads lean towards like, but what's the truth? Let's, right and wrong, good and bad. And so Paul uses both metaphors in the same book, just a few verses from one another. Like, I was a mother among you in this category. I was a father among you over here. And the goal, you guys, is in Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, is to come alongside, to support, to care for. His context is to the church, all generations, different time period, no adolescent development, by the way. By the way, Jesus never went through his teenage adolescent years. There's no such thing. Think about it. I mean, Jesus, 12 years old, he's reasoning in the temple courts with the leaders. And you go, well, he was God. Well, developmentally, he was there. He was there. So it's interesting. One of my pet peeves for youth pastors is that they don't use Jesus as an example of a teenager in those years. By the way, we don't have much to know about that, but there's no such thing developmentally. He went from child to adult like overnight, just like Little House on the Prairie. I talked about that in the 1800s, but way before that. So here's the deal, you guys. There's the adolescent up on the typewriter. We need to provide the support for them underneath. That's the goal. And so as we look at this, there's convergence, like we're all going the same direction. We're all converging on all the next generation in our church. But there's congruence that's going on. We're all sending the same message as much as we can. One of the reasons I have this class is so we're all on the same page to send the same message. I mean, clarity is the key here. And so if we know what the philosophy and what we're doing around Mission Hills and the next gen, then we can all get on board together to do this whole thing. And so it's going to take a whole community, or that popular phrase that was way before Hillary Clinton, it's going to take a village to raise a child. It's the church, friends, coaches, teachers, caring adults. It's everybody surrounding every single adolescent in the church. There used to be a day in the 70s is when youth ministry began to take off, and parachurch ministries popped up a little bit before that, but in the church. So what was going on? So the older saints, I love them, the older saints would see kids running down the hallway who were adolescents and say, we need to have a special space for them because they're kind of getting in our way. So what happens? They get a youth room. You guys can paint the walls, do whatever you want. Listen, I've been there, done that as a youth pastor. Like, that's awesome. Gave me my own space. We did our own thing, wrecked everything, everything's disaster. The senior pastor calls you a number. You know what, you got to straighten that up, But it's because, hey, they're kind of getting in our way. They need their own space. They need their own dedicated staff person actually to oversee them. And in the 70s, this started to pick up speed, and youth specialties came into play, which was the big youth ministry on the block for parachurch stuff to train and this whole thing. And so what happened over time is it's not just their own room. Now we're gonna build our own building for them. They're gonna get their own use space for them. And it's with good intentions that we separated them from the rest of the church. But the problem is, what happens? That doesn't do this. That doesn't surround them and love them. So the goal here, actually, this might surprise you, is the faster they can be a part of the big church, the better. The faster they can be a part of the big church, the better. Why? Because we want to expose them to the main worship service, to the other events going on, for dads to bring sons, moms to bring daughters, for all this to happen so that they can individuate, come out of adolescent development, be connected to the larger church with that Heavenly Father attachment, that whole thing as fast as they can. Not when they graduate from high school or they get through young adult ministry, but now. You tracking with me? That's the goal across all of us, from all our staff with next gen stuff, is the faster they can get. That doesn't discredit kids ministry or student ministry. They're still their environments that are really awesome. But to help them connect to the larger intergenerational body is the goal. The faster, the better. Then they're going to own it, be a part of it. By the way, that's why there are different generations on stage singing. That's why there are different generations that are involved in our student ministry. It's all intentional around connecting the generations so they can be connected to the larger body faster. Make sense? So let me drill down a little bit more. How can we help? Here's some big broad categories for you. Build scaffolding around relationships. What does that mean? It means scaffolding around a building it supports it to help it, your renovation and build something. You put scaffolding around it to build it up because you need that because it's going to be really tall. And if you don't have the scaffolding, it might fall down. And so you want to have a bunch of relationships, as I just illustrated, where coaches, teachers, administration, youth workers, grandparents are all surrounding the next generation to help them. Another thing we can do is, in your handouts there are what's called the 40 developmental assets. Let me hit and run on this really fast. There's a group called Search Institute that has Christian roots, and their whole sole purpose was what assets do we need to have in the next generation so that the more of those are checked off, and you can read through the list later this afternoon if you need something to take a nap with. In their categories on the left-hand side, you can see the big categories, but it drills down to 40 of them. The more of those that are checked off during adolescence, the greater percentage of that child will come out the other side being a productive member of society. Did you hear that? So if you look through that, like study habits, relationships, conflict resolution, involved in a religious organization, because this is a Christian research institute that's trying to appeal to the masses. That's why they wrote it the way they did. But more of those that are checked off, the more likely that these students are going to come out the other side. So as a parent, as a coach, as a teacher, you can look through that list with your own child, and you can see, oh, yep, our family's messed up, but we're fairly healthy. So yep, check that one off. You work through the list and you figure out it's true. So you go to a city or a space where a lot of those aren't true. In poor communities or broken families, or, you can see the obvious writing on the wall, literally right there, of how it's so hard for this kid to come out through adolescence because they don't have the support that they need. This has been really, really helpful. Quick story. Years ago, as our kids have been at Summit Ridge Middle School and Dakota Ridge High School on that side of town. And as we've come through that, I was a part of a group with parents, administrators, teachers, church people that came together, and we're grateful because the principal is a believer. And so I came in the room and he collected a group of pastors and all these people together to think through some of these big issues. Like, how can we all come together to support the next generation? And what did he pull out? He pulled out the 40 developmental assets, which he knows is Christian-based. But a lot of the community members in the room have no idea. And the language is basic enough, but the idea is it's based on, ultimately, how can we help them faithfully follow Jesus and get these things in their lives so they're supported through this journey. It was awesome to be in the room and see that take place in that way. Another thing we need to do is adding more Christ-following adults in kids' lives. I said it last week, but I'll drill down a little bit this week, is as a parent, if you're not thinking through at least 5 Christ-following adults who you can surround your kids now, then you're going to be missing out. And I mean proactively, intentionally, like you're asking them. I've told you guys, with my upper 2 oldest ones in particular, but the youngest 2, I've told different people, you have permission to speak into my child's life. Would you please, hang out with them, take them out to coffee, take them for a meal. You can speak into their lives. Why am I doing that? Because I know where my voice is sometimes, but if you can surround with like-minded people that love them, care for them, that can be a staff member here at Mission Hills, that can be a coach that you know really well, it can be teachers, administration, community members, where you're going, man, would you just hang out with my kids and speak the same language that I'm speaking to them, be on the same page, not about all things, but enough that gets them going the same direction. That's going to be the key to supporting them with this net underneath the tightrope of adolescence to get them going the right direction. Another thing we can do is, for you to know, is that healthy brain development is healthy attachment. So that whole maternal attachment, paternal attachment, it's amazing. There's research lining up that if you want their frontal lobe to grow faster, have a closer relationship with your child. It's like, hello, well, that makes sense. But the research backs that, because now we can have MRIs of brains and things like that. You can actually track this stuff to know that the closer you are, the more communication's open and honest, the more they know that they're loved for who they are and not what they do. all that stuff, the likelihood of them becoming a full-fledged adult is faster. And who doesn't want that, mom and dad? Do you want them to live in your house the rest of your lives? Probably not. So how do we do that? Well, the way we do it is we're loving them deeply, caring for them, having open, honest communication. So that's another thing for you to know. That's just a little fringe benefit around that. A secure attachment to mom and dad helps this whole process move forward faster. And it takes a whole community to raise a kid, or their consequences if you're not careful. So we need to, sometimes we just think inside the church, but we got to think beyond the church, you guys. We got to think to community, and many of you are coaching your kids' teams, or you're involved in the community, you're volunteering at your school, whatever else. And you need to now be on the lookout for other people that you can go, hey, you have such an influence in my kid's life. Would you help come alongside of them in this area? And not just academically, so they get a better grade, but for who they are. Like, can you just be around them? And the more we do that, because it does take a community, the better off we'll be. What's the role of parents in this whole thing? I've come to realize slowly, probably, there's seasons of parenting. And I think it plays out this way, and here's the metaphor I'm playing with, is Sherpa is the first stage of this whole thing. From like 0 to 10 years old, what are we doing mainly? We're laying out the path. We're putting up the ropes. We're putting a ladder down. Because Sherpas, that's what they do. They go out ahead of the climbers. They lay it all down. They make sure everything's safe. They check the weather report. They do all these things on the mountain for Everest before a climber pays all that money to climb that thing, and they want to. So they, as much as they can, set up the environment, the atmosphere, to be able to lay some things down so that their climbing kids can be set up for success. Boundaries, truth, Bible, of course, all those things that you do, living out your faith in Jesus in front of them with authenticity, and it's not fake or this weird subculture Christian thing that we have sometimes going on, but it's authentic and real. I think that's the role that we go through from about 0 to 10. Now, why do I say 0 to 10? Because now you know. Now you know when adolescence starts. I think we transition to a rabbi phase. By the way, there are female rabbis. That's one. And so what you do then is your teacher role. You're now not just around the Bible, because that's what rabbis were, right? They knew the first 5 books of the Bible really, really well. They interpreted it, which is a whole other set of Jewish documents where all the rabbis compare notes around their interpretations. But that's what you're doing. You're interpreting things. You're trying to lay out groundwork. You're teaching the Bible. If you don't know how to do that, we have tons of resources around this place to help you. The reason our curriculum is the way it is, from kids ministry all the way through, is there's a parent side of that whole thing where we can come alongside and help and provide the right questions for you to ask of your children on a weekly basis if you want to. So you don't have to know the Bible like the back of your hand, but that's certainly the guide that we need to start with to lay a foundation. So as you're growing closer, as a friend of mine would say, it's like if you picture discipleship as a rope, and if I'm like, let's say I'm a 7 on the rope and my child's a 1 on the rope, as I grow to an 8, hopefully your child's growing to a 2. You know what I'm saying? And you keep growing and they keep growing. So there's a progressiveness that goes on there. So you're coming alongside and carrying more of a rabbi. By the way, you're modeling it too. More is caught than taught most of the time. It just is. And that's negative and positive. There's plenty of negative things I've done that has been caught over the years that now I see in my own kids that is terrible. There's other things that are caught, like, when's the last time your child caught you reading your Bible? Or caught you doing a Bible study? Or caught you praying? That has a huge, huge influence in your child's life. Or teachers or coaches that subtly, appropriately, particularly in public schools, make it known that they're a follower of Jesus. And it has quite an impact when a Christian kid finds that out, whether it's a cool saying on the board that happens to be a biblical verse or some kind of knickknack that's next to their desk that would show that they're a follower of Jesus. I mean, those are more is caught than taught a lot of the time. So we need to model that. And then finally, we hope and we pray that we get to a place in parenting where we're a sage. And what that means is our children come back around to ask for wisdom. And so in the middle of this adolescent thing, you're like, I wish you would just take my wisdom. But you know the battle that's going on, but you hope and pray when they come out the other side that they'll come back around and go, you know what? Not that they come back around and go, you were so right and I was so wrong most of the time back then, but that they come back around and they ask for like, but how do I navigate this part of my life? How do I navigate this thing? And so you're more of a sage that they're coming to. You're not having to go to them, they're really coming to you. I've seen all three of these phases play out at me being a son in my own life, and I see it playing out with my 3 kids in the different stages that they're in. And sometimes you hope they're in more of one than another, but when you know, here's the good news, you guys, when you know that parenting is seasonal, it kind of takes the pressure off a little bit. Like this is a marathon, it's not a sprint, right? You don't have to get it all figured out by next weekend. You just know what's going on, and then you appropriately provide support to surround them with the right people, and you pray. But at the end of the day, grace is what's going to bring them home. Grace is what's going to bring them home. That's really hard for me because I err towards truth than grace, just being honest. And probably typical dad, typical male, but I just do. I'm a thinker more than a feeler, just in personality. And so I lean that direction, and I've got to work overdrive on the grace side than the truth side. I don't know what it is for you, but you might want to figure that out as you're navigating this stuff with everybody. So here's some just tips that, man, I'm still working on these things, is you need to be the adult. So easy to say right now in this classroom, but then something happens this afternoon with your child, and all of a sudden you catch yourself going, I'm not being the adult right now. I'm raising my voice, or I'm whatever, or I'm defaulting. I'm like going down to their level. Any of you guys ever played sports and you know you should have blown that team out, but you went down to their level? Happened with me with tennis all the time. Played first doubles in high school, did pretty well. There were a couple teams I ran into, like we should have blown them out, but it's just like so frustrating because you're lowered down to their level and not playing up to what you're capable of doing. And I think parenting is like that sometimes. we drop down to their level and go, I'm the one acting like the adolescent right now. I'm not acting like the adult in the room. And so I'm still working on that. And so we end up defaulting to bad places. Or think long haul, you guys. Think long haul. Marathon, not sprint. Think long haul for your child in all categories, not just, I got to have it all together by next weekend. Be a student of your child. Figure out who they are, even in the midst of them trying on different selves to figure out who they are. You need to be a student of them because every single child is unique and different. And so you customize your parenting to them, don't you? There's no one size fits all. And we have 3 kids, and they're 3 very different in many ways. And so when your child says it's not fair, you can say, you're right, it's not fair because you're different than them. And it doesn't matter what I did back then with them. We're going to do something different with you because you're different. You need different boundaries, different margins because you're a different child altogether. I know it's hard. We got to do that. Say you're sorry a lot. More is caught than taught. And every time you say you're sorry when you've blown it as a parent or a teacher or a coach, what you're modeling is forgiveness. And even though you're going, I am so right, but maybe I wasn't there, so I got to humble myself and say, I'm sorry for my part, because you're modeling to them forgiveness, which ultimately models to them Jesus. Because every time you blow it and make a mistake and you ask for forgiveness, you're modeling back to them grace. Like this is how we do conflict resolution. We have to come to a place where I'm sorry. Please forgive me. And then, by the way, it doesn't matter how they respond. You don't wait for their response for you to feel like you're forgiven. That goes both ways. It's just you do your part. Be flexible, yet forward-thinking. Think seasons. Just shared about that. So let me offer a goal of parenting for you, okay? Ultimate goal for all of us is to love in such a way that your child is convinced that they are fully capable of making a positive impact in the world for Jesus. Love in such a way. So you guys, here's a sneak peek into my own heart, is at the end of the day, I just want all 3 of my kids to know how much I love them for who they are. Still working on that part, but in the seasons that we're in. But that's what I want them to know, how much I love them for who they are, not what they do, not the grades they get or the goals they score or the job they land someday or whatever. But just love them for who they are so that they can make a difference for Jesus in the world, however they've been custom designed by him to do that. And so I might have an opinion about that, but it really doesn't matter what my opinion is. I want them to be guided ultimately by the Holy Spirit to lead them to the places they need to go and serve. That's the ultimate goal. There's so much not in this definition, this goal, that we fall into, isn't there? Like GPA is not here. College scholarships aren't here. They aren't. All the academic stuff, all that stuff, we know that's helpful, but that's not the ultimate goal. Because when they're 25, 30, 40 years old, I hope that they want to circle back around so that my wife and I are Sherpas. But if we're packing this definition with other things with that, the odds of them circling back around are zero because they don't want the pressure and all that stuff anymore that they felt when they were growing up. You tracking with me? You guys, just being transparent here for just a second. There have been times when we've actually said out loud to our kids, like, I don't know where you're getting the pressure from, but it's not from us. We are not putting pressure on you to get a certain GPA or to perform in an athletic field, or we're not doing that. I need to tell you that out loud again. It's not coming from us. You might feel that from external forces, or internally you're putting pressure on yourself, but it's not coming from us. Maybe some of you here need to get to a place in your own heart where you actually believe that, but you say that out loud to your own child. It'll validate them, it'll help them, but it has to be done over time. Make sense? And then I love this picture of Rembrandt's prodigal son coming home, and a great story. So he comes home, it's grace, it's all about grace, but the older brothers in the backyard, arms crossed, like, well, what about me? You know, how we can play out and be different characters in the story from the father to the son to the older son. But at the end of the day, grace brings them home. At the end of the day, they know their love for who they are, not what they do. It's that grace extended. But I know everything inside of us wants to say, but no, truth, truth, truth. But it really is grace that brings them home. Let me give you this. One of my favorite verses in all Scripture, actually, one of my life verses. I will come and proclaim the mighty acts, sovereign Lord. I will proclaim your righteous deeds, yours alone. Since my youth, God, you have taught me, and to this day declare your marvelous deeds. Even when I am old and gray, do not forsake me, my God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your mighty deeds to all who are to come. At the end of the day, you guys, what it all boils down to is us sharing how awesome God is to our child. He's so faithful. He's been so faithful in the past. Let me tell you about that. He's going to be that faithful to you in the future, and you're going to end up telling your kids the same stories about how faithful God is. Ultimately, it's in Jesus and what Jesus has done for us. But that's what happened in the Old Testament. That's why they set up standing stones when they crossed the Jordan to remind them. So when children walk by and go, hey, Dad, Grandpa, what are those stones about? Oh, let me tell you how faithful God was back then. That's why all the Jews have the festivals they still celebrate today, is to show that that right there is the example of how faithful God is. So they tell the stories. We need to have some faithful stories, you guys. I don't know how you collect that as a family, but you need to have some family stories of how faithful God's been, whether he provided that job, whether he got you through that transition, whether, man, it was miraculous that you were even born, fill in the blank of your child's name. Whatever the circumstances are, you need to be able to share those stories with them. So you go, you know what, I know you're in a hard spot right now, but God is so faithful. It's going to be okay. You're going to get through this. It's just a season. And maybe for you as a parent, you're going, but what about me? I'm feeling a rough spot as a parent right now to get through this season. God is faithful. He's going to get you through it. He's always been faithful. It's going to be okay. And he's the Savior and you're not, which is a great answer to prayer, isn't it? That's good news. This sort of kind of wraps up week 2. Lord, thank you that we have a lot of resources we can pull from to understand what adolescents are going through, and we can be able to more effectively come alongside of them and love them and care for them and balance truth and grace equaling love, and give us wisdom and discernment as we walk alongside as parents, coaches, teachers. Help us to understand so we can reach them with Jesus. And they would ultimately be a Christ-following adult one day and be faithful. Pass it on to the generations to come. So that's our hope and our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.